What's up, guys? I'm going to be showing you how to convert your drum audio into MIDI information without the use of any other trigger plugin for free. So as long as your DAW has the same functionality of these plugins that I use in Reaper, you should be good. If not, you can download the Reaper plugins for free anyways and be able to do the same thing that I do here. As far as I'm concerned, this is the most efficient way of doing it. It might not be, I could be completely wrong, but this is the way I do it. This gives me the most control and I'm pretty satisfied with how this goes. So I hope you guys enjoy this. So let's get right into it. We have a kit set up here of just kick, snare, and overheads. It's from a live recording at a youth camp, and let's just listen to it. So there's some there's processing on the snare and overheads, but I've left the kick dry. So I'm fine with the overheads and the snare, but if we listen to the kick here soloed especially, you're going to hear that it does not work well. So the kick drum was a Yamaha Stage Custom, I believe, and it had a Beta 91 inside of it, and it sounded good in person, but the problem was because it was a last minute kind of grab for the kit, it doesn't have any muffling inside of the kick drum, which can sound good, but in this case it has this really basketball-y phasiness inside of it that really isn't pleasant and that is basically impossible to take out at the source tone. So we're going to replace this with a sample in order to give us the best sound that we want out of this mix. And we're not going for a full mix right now, just for presentation of how to do this. So the first thing we're going to do in our process to make this into MIDI information is we're going to isolate the sound as much as possible in order to get the most accurate and controllable MIDI information. So the first thing I would do is use a EQ. So my goal with this EQ isn't to make the kick sound good, it's to isolate the kick as much as possible from the other kit information. Mainly the snare, since it's a Beta 91, is going to be picking up a lot of the snare drum that's right behind the microphone. So what you can hear from this is that it isolated a lot of the attack from the snare drum, which is really good because we're going to be using a transient designer in order to get our kick to be very overly punchy and just basically end up being a blip of information rather than a sound. So we're going to take the sustain all the way down and bring up the attack, and I'll bring down the output on this so it's not destroying our eardrums. So there you can see the kick is a lot shorter. It has a very harsh attack to it. And that's not good enough. So we're going to put on another transient controller. And I'm going to bring down the attack a little bit because that's when we need the most. We need to get rid of all the sustain of this kick drum. So it's going to be even shorter now. So you can hear there, it's almost like a gate, but it's a little bit smarter than a gate, a little bit easier to use and more consistent for this kind of purpose. But the last thing that we're going to do, just for precautionary reasons, we're going to put on just a limiter clipper. You can use any sort of compressor or limiter on this just to even out the transients of this because they're super pokey. So it's going to be the same amount of signal every single time that comes out of this kick drum. So you can see now the kick drum just stays at this -1 level every single time that it's hit. And that's really good because now it's just this really consistent opening of kick drum sound that we need to trigger our MIDI information. So now what we're going to be doing is making a new track called Kick MIDI. And then we're going to send this information into this channel. And let's turn off the send for this so we don't have to listen through that channel. Only listen through this channel. And we're going to be using the Regate plugin, which is really good for this application because it has just a handy button that creates MIDI information every single time the gate opens. So we're going to send this audio in here and tweak this gate to be very short and very controlled. So now you can hear the kick's even shorter now, and it's just basically the super clean burst of information every single time that the kick is hit, which is exactly what we want. So now, in order to put this into MIDI information, I'm going to turn off the input for this and set the record output to MIDI only. And basically, kind of like the process of reamping guitars, I'm just going to hit record and let the MIDI information record down. Now that this is done, we can see here when we open this that we just have this big sheet of MIDI information representing every single one of our kick drum hits, just like you would program. And you can see here that it's all just one velocity, just straight up, no variations. There are some plugins like in Reaper, like a free audio to MIDI drum plugin. But the problem that I have with that is when it has varying velocities, it basically only either does full velocity or like 40 or like 2. So the velocity detection of that one isn't really good. So I would prefer to do that by hand, which is a little bit more tedious, but in the end can be a lot more controllable and end up with a better product. So now let's load in Contact. And let's load in the GGD Modern and Massive library. So what we can do now is we can just mute this information here and even just get rid of this gate, because all we have now is this MIDI information. And let's just make sure we set this mapping correctly. So now that we set this to kick by just using the learn button here, and let's solo these two mics. And let's change the kick to the classic Babinga from the Thomas Star Classic. So now you can hear that we've transformed the ugly sounding kick drum into this beautiful Tama kick drum that sounds absolutely fantastic in this GGD Modern Massive pack. We can just kind of listen to it in the context of this mix. Final thing before any sort of mixing needs to happen is that we need to make sure that this MIDI information, because it's all just single velocity, max velocity, straight on hits, we need to do two things. We need to vary up the velocities so that they're correct to being what's played, as well as look for any missed triggers or notes that didn't trigger. Because of this process, there's going to be things like flams or quick doubles or big rolls aren't going to trigger properly, and that could happen as well with just any other trigger program, but this especially. I believe there's a part here that has a flam in it on the kick drum, or a double, that did not get tracked, so let's find that. So this note right here, this one needs a 30-second note right behind it. Let's throw that in there. There we go. Other than that, there's no other missing information. So now all we have to do is to just bring down the velocity of these. I don't like my drums programmed at 127 all the way through. I think it's a lot better sounding once you get to like the second highest velocity, around the 105 to 115 region around here. So I'm going to bring these down to like 110. Now, lastly, just play around here with velocities and make sure that you're programming realistic things. Most of this is just straight 8s on the kick, so it's very plausible that a drummer could be playing these, at full strength or very consistent strength. The only thing that needs to be changed here is this double here on the kick drum. It's just a one-footed double, so there's no way that these are going to be too consistent with each other. So the first hit is usually going to be a lot softer, probably within the 60 range. Which makes a lot more sense because the drummer is just hitting that with 1 foot. So the first hit comes down really soft compared to the second hit, which has the full foot of force. We can just throw on some processing here. And you can hear the final result. So that's how I convert drum audio into MIDI information. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Hope you guys can learn. Any questions or concerns, put them in the comments, and peace out.